So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to make really good white bread. Sorry about the video quality, but this video was recorded a long time ago on a pretty good camera at the time, but in today's standards, it's not really high quality or anything. But regardless, the bread that we're going to make is going to be moist, chewy, flavorful, and probably the best white bread you're ever going to make. This method of making white bread takes a long time, but there's no shortcuts to good bread, because you've got to give the yeast time to break the flour down into gluten and all the sugars and flavors that you want in bread. It's the gluten in bread that makes it chewy and moist, and that's what you want from the yeast. You can't rush the process, you gotta give it time, otherwise your bread's just not going to turn out right. So the first step is to make poulish, and that's just a starter or a sponge pre-ferment, so you're letting the yeast work on the flour for a good 12 hours. If you have a starter that's been going for 100 years, then that's probably what you'll want to use, but obviously most people don't have that, so we'll just use commercially available yeast, throw it into a little bowl, and let it go for 12 hours. So let's mix up our water, yeast, sugar, and flour, and make our sponge or poulish. We're going to let that sit for 12 hours. We're going to put a bag on it just so it doesn't dry out, and then come back in 12 hours. So now 12 hours has passed, and we're going to mix our flour, sugar, more yeast, some salt, and you can put in butter and oil if you want. That's a softening agent and just makes your bread even softer, but if you don't want that, you don't need it because it's going to be pretty moist and chewy as is. So we'll mix up the flour, the yeast, the sugar, and then once that's ready, mix it in with poulish and add flour into the bowl until it gets thick enough that you can take it out and start kneading it on the table. To knead the bread, you use your strong hand's palm, push into the dough, use your weak hand to fold it over, rotate it a quarter turn, and press with the palm of your right hand. And just keep doing that for 800 cycles or 10 to 15 minutes. If you don't know what consistency to leave it at, just put in as little flour as you can, because you can't have too moist of a dough. If it's a moist dough, all you gotta do is bake it a little longer. If you like really moist bread, leave it moist and then just bake it for 10 more minutes. Now that the dough's ready to rise, we're gonna let it rise 4 times at about 2 hours each. And then we're gonna make the loaves, let it rise for another hour, and then put it in the oven. So butter your bowl. Don't use oil because it's just gonna stick to it. The best thing to use is butter. You can use oil if you really want to, but I always find that it sticks to oiled containers, so I always use butter. So now we've got it in the bowl, we're going to let it rise, and we'll be back in an hour and a half. If it's 20 degrees, you want to leave it for 2 hours, but if it's like 28 degrees out or warm, you don't need to let it rise for that long, so 1.5 hours of rising should be fine. So now we're back after 1.5 hours of rising. We're going to flatten it a bit, fold it over, tuck in the edges, put it back in the bowl, and we'll let it rise for another 1.5 hours. So that's the second time. This is the third. Now it's done rising for another 1.5 hours. So now this is the last time, and we're going to cut it up into 3 pieces. we've made quite a bit, so we could put it into 3 different loaf pans. Now we're going to let it rise in there for another hour, and then we're going to throw it into the oven. To bake it, you want to preheat to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. Leave a pan on the bottom and get a spritz bottle. You're going to want to spray that pan right before you throw your loaves in there. That'll make the oven 100% humidity, and that allows your bread to expand in the first 5 to 10 minutes. You also want to spritz the top of your bread so that it brings the sugars to the top, and then it'll make it flavorful, and it also keeps the crust moist so that in the first 5 to 10 minutes the bread can rise a lot. If the crust dries out, hardens, it's going to stop the bread from rising. So spritz everything up, make sure it's all nice and wet, and then throw the 3 loaves in there. It's going to bake and rise really quickly. After 5 minutes at 425, you'll want to reduce it to 325 and then bake for another 40 minutes. Now we're done baking it, take it out, and let's take a look at the loaves. So that looks pretty good. They rose a lot. So that's how you make really chewy, moist, and tasty white bread from scratch. This is an old school way of doing it. Takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort, but it's definitely worth the effort that you put into it. We're going to call it a Minski bread because my friend Minski is the one who taught me how to make this. So now you know how to make the best white bread ever. Give it a try, enjoy some good white bread, stop eating artificial preservatives, stop eating SSL, whatever chemical that is. Eat some healthy homemade bread. I hope that helps. Thanks for watching, and enjoy your bread. Here are a few things to note about bread making. I just talk about the yeast, the salt, the sugar, butter and oil, and milk, and what all that means to bread making. So take a quick look if you're interested, and see if you can use this knowledge to adjust your bread a little bit. A couple reasons to make your own white bread instead of buying commercially available bread is because the commercially available bread has SSL in it, or sodium sterolactylate, and calcium propionate. Calcium propionate is considered slightly toxic, and it's because it's used to stop the growth of mold. If it's being used to stop the growth of mold, you probably don't want to be eating that stuff and have it inside your bread. So it's best to make your own bread. You can get that out of there. You can remove that from your diet. Also, sodium sterolactylate, or SSL for short, is used to rise the bread, and the government limits that to 0.5%. So it's probably not good for you if the government needs to limit the amount of SSL inside your bread. So you might as well make your own bread and just put some time into it, and that'll let it rise instead of having to put a chemical in there to make it rise. Also, the monoglycerides and diglycerides might be derived from animal fat. So if you're a vegetarian and you don't want to be eating animals or products from animals, you probably don't want to be eating monoglycerides and diglycerides from animals that you have no idea where they came from or what's been done to them. So those are all good reasons to make your own white bread.